Hi, Andrew.
Hey Bob, how
How
you
you
doing?
doing?
I'm good. I have a visual icebreaker in the style of
Oh, good.
Mickey
I was
Cows.
worried that this would be too formal. What is it? Is that some Roman? What is that?
Not
No, a
quite.
Viking? Is that a Viking?
It actually is, or it
You
could
know,
be
I have
considered
Viking
one.
blood. I don't want to make this all about me, but I just got my ancestry.com thing a couple weeks ago.
Oh, really?
Like,
I thought you were like Scottish. Are you Scandinavian?
it turns out I've got, what was it, 12 or 16% Swedish and Danish. Yeah,
Okay,
no,
well
you can,
you have
yeah.
that in common with this guy,
Who is that
actually.
guy?
So this is Rurik, or maybe to approximate the Russian pronunciation, Rurik.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the Viking chieftain of the Rus people who was
Ooh.
invited to reign in Novgorod in the year 862, which is when the Russian state started to exist as a centralized state. And you would know that, Bob, if you had watched Tucker Carlson's interview of Vladimir Putin, because Putin opened up with I think you can call it a soliloquy, a historical soliloquy that lasted about an hour, and in which he went all the way back to the 800s and talked about the deep roots of Russia. And arguably, actually, I think definitely was making a case for why we shouldn't think that the Ukrainian people even exist. And even though you didn't watch this interview, I kind of wanted to ask you about something related to that because it's related to NATO expansion and all this stuff that we've talked about. But maybe we should introduce the Earthling Unplugged
Like
first.
what this thing is. Yeah, this is Earthling Unplugged. You're Andrew Day. I'm Robert Wright. Earthling Unplugged. The Earthling is the Friday edition of the Nonzero Newsletter. This is the Nonzero podcast. This week's Earthling is mostly put to bed, but not entirely. And so we thought we'd take a break and record a podcast about
Right.
and about other things because the Putin thing, for example, is doesn't really figure in it. But since you spent 2 hours watching the Putin thing, we
Yes.
figured why let that go to waste? That's content. That's not wasted time, Andrew. That's content.
And everyone is talking about it. Maybe if it had happened earlier in the week, we would have included it in the Earthling and talked about it as one of the items, but it didn't. So what I wanted to talk about is, there's been this debate the past couple years between those who think that NATO's eastward expansion toward Russia, created security concerns in the Kremlin, which explains why Putin decided to invade,
Hmm.
right? And on the other side of the debate are people who think that Putin has imperial ambitions. Maybe he even wants to march all the way across Europe. Certainly, he wanted to kind of recover the Russian lands and bring Ukraine back into Russia's orbit as a kind of colonial project or to
Hmm.
reconstitute a non-communist form of the Soviet Union or something. And last night during the interview, Tucker Carlson was clearly trying to goad Putin into talking about NATO expansion and talking about the security threat that he felt from the US led West. And instead, Putin, as I said, went on this monologue. And
About how he wants to conquer the world and Russia deserves to have it.
well, so,
Tucker must have been pretty
actually,
disappointed.
he did eventually get around to talking about NATO expansion and arms agreements that the US has ripped up or missed opportunities for cooperation.
Okay.
But the first hour, it's kind of a pet peeve of mine when people use the word bizarre to describe something that Trump does or Putin does, because it can kind of dismiss it without, providing an analysis. But it was pretty bizarre. And Tucker Carlson looked a little mystified about why Putin was going on as if Tucker Carlson wasn't even there, just giving this really long, elaborate historical
Like
speech.
how long were the stretches that he actually talked without like any interruption? He didn't go a whole hour without another question, right?
The only interruptions, Tucker Carlson would kind of intervene and kind of say, I don't see how this is really relevant because Tucker Carlson's opening
Oh,
question was, you basically asking him to talk about the security threats that Russia faced just prior to the full scale invasion. Um, and he said, "Well, you studied history in college, so I'm gonna talk about history. This isn't just a talk show, right? It's a serious discussion. I just need a minute of your time." he probably talked for 20 minutes before Tucker Carlson said anything, and then Putin kind of brushed him away and continued talking. And you're already seeing it on Twitter. People are using this as evidence that the like Michael McFaul position was right. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what I wanted to hear from you. I can think of some ways to reconcile these two alternative explanations, but I was kind of hoping to hear that from you.
Um, well, I've never been kind of Mearsheimer about this. In other words, it's just this rational calculation about Russian security. I do think the NATO thing looms large with Putin. I think the EU does too. But I think also, and it sounds like Putin talked about this, the way the U.S. has treated Russia in Putin's view, and treated the so-called rules-based or treated international law, I think has figured in all of this too. I mean,
Hmm.
there's 2 decades of deteriorating relations, and Putin feeling increasingly aggrieved, increasingly slighted, and he does seem to be somebody with kind of a chip on his shoulder
Yeah.
who really respect is really important to him. We didn't give it to him. I'm willing to defend that claim at tremendous length. And so I think slowly things went downhill. And I mean, first of all, he kind of warned us in 2007 or 8 at the Munich Security Conference. He gave this speech noting that the U.S. had run roughshod over international law. And if we didn't change our ways, there was going to be trouble. Um, and of course, he also warned us about Ukraine and at various times. But I think you know people's psychology is fluid,
Hmm.
and like whatever he went into the invasion thinking, okay, it's now been 2 years, and um, it's a much bigger mess than he realized it was going to be. And being human, he's got to kind of justify that. So
Mm.
I would first of all just say, as a general principle, his story about himself and even his actual aspirations change over time. And I don't mean they've only changed over that short period. I think, all along, a lot of things are going on. He's getting more and more aggrieved. He's also getting older, and he's
Hmm.
starting to think about his legacy. And like, how's he going to be remembered? Hey, could he be remembered as the person who restored Russia to its rightful ownership of certain parts of Ukraine? Which what's the term? Did you use the term already? There's a term that encompasses like
Rus.
Crimea and
Mm.
and
Okay.
and the Donbass and Odessa, and there's like a map you can draw that at one point in history was called something or other by the Russians, and it was part of Russia. Um,
Mm.
anyway, uh, so I think and I heard the Russians with attitude guys like more than a year ago, a couple years ago, maybe almost say he's gotten a little more grandiose over time, and so these things change.
Hmm.
And I think we could be living in a totally different world if the US had started by not expanding NATO, which is the first problem, and done some other things. Not intervened in Kosovo, not invaded Iraq, done 5 or 6 other things. Um, but the main point I'd make is I still don't think he has any aspirations to conquer Poland, as some people think. But
Yeah.
um, obviously he's invaded Ukraine. He's got a story justifying that. I still believe firmly that there are concessions he would have accepted before the war that would have prevented the invasion. Now, maybe they're unacceptable to us, and maybe they're politically unsellable in America to the blob or whatever. Uh, but I think there are those things that are just in the realm of Russian security, and they're about NATO and maybe kind of involve the EU and so on. So I believe that very firmly. Now, a few months before the invasion, was it getting too late? Maybe. But if you want to talk like a year before, 6 months before, I feel quite confident of that. Um,
And Tucker Carlson asked him that too. Like, at what point did you decide? At what
Mm.
point was it too late and the relations had sunk too badly?
What did he say?
He didn't answer. He was
Mm.
often just kind of brushing aside Tucker Carlson's questions, which, were actually, I wouldn't say adversarial, but there was a kind of hint of that. It wasn't a super comfortable interview. Putin kind of did a little bit of like power moves vis-a-vis Tucker, made fun of him kind of in an underhanded way for being rejected by the CIA out of college. Apparently, Tucker comes from an intelligence background and applied to the CIA. Um, but yeah, so the first hour of the interview when he was giving this soliloquy, it seemed to evince a sincere historical interest and a
Yeah,
particular historical view. It wouldn't justify the idea that, or corroborate the idea that Putin wants to march across Eastern Europe because, he's just talking about these lands that he sees as being rightfully Russian,
right.
which don't go past Ukraine, maybe don't even go into Western Ukraine.
Yeah, I don't think he
But
cares that much about a lot of Western Ukraine, right?
right. But what he was saying did seem to justify the argument that he doesn't see Ukraine as a legitimate or real nation. Like he clearly believes that they're
No,
just Russian people. Mhm.
I mean, I think he's probably, well, he's on record saying that in 2008. You know,
Yeah.
I think if I remember correctly, Bill Burns, who was then ambassador to Russia, I think was uh I think records in his memoirs a conversation with him where Putin is warning against NATO expansion. And what he says is, if you do this, there's going to be a civil war in Ukraine because Ukraine is not a real nation. What he means is there are natural divisions within Ukraine.
Hmm.
That he means the borders of modern Ukraine do not correspond to what he sees as its kind of natural ethnic cohesion or whatever. And uh, so, I mean, he's been thinking about a lot of this for a long time, and I think as the invasion approaches, you know, um, he's justifying it in as many ways as possible to himself and when he talks to the world. And
Hmm.
as the war wears on, it's more important that he justify it in kind of three dimensionally, and it's like whenever anybody is doing something that's getting a lot of condemnation, they come up with as many rationales as possible. I don't mean he doesn't believe them,
Yeah.
uh, and I don't mean they haven't been simmering for a long time. I just mean it's still clear to me this didn't have to happen.
Yeah.
Now, the closer you get to February 2022, as you travel from 1999, it gets more and more likely that we're going to have trouble. But this didn't have to happen.
Right. Maybe just like 2 points on that. There is this idea in political science that during wars, leaders get more ambitious and they start to care less about collateral damage and stuff like that. So there is this kind of political science idea that leaders maybe become a bit more grandiose over the course of the war. And
Mm.
I'll also say, I don't Samuel Huntington in Clash of Civilizations, if you ever read that book, he talks about Ukraine as being, I think his term is like cleft country, because, he thinks that in this new post-Cold War era, the fault lines for conflict will run along cultural civilizational lines rather than ideological capitalism versus communism lines.
Right.
And that line between the West and Russia runs through Ukraine. Um, but he thought that it wouldn't
Mm.
create a problem because he thought that Ukraine would maintain good relations with Russia, not go too far into the Western orbit.
Hmm.
And he said probably it won't go into the Western orbit and incite a cataclysm, but if it does, if Europe tries to bring Ukraine in and make it a non-Russian state, there's going to be an earthquake, basically. Um, which I find kind of prescient. And I think kind of gives a way to reconcile these two alternative
Yeah.
explanations.
Well, of course, Huntington's premise, presumably, as I recall his book, is that it's going to be hard to bring Russia very much into the West, because his whole idea is that there are these naturally coherent civilizations and there will be some kind of tension between them. Although
Hmm.
Huntington is, to a surprising extent, a one worlder in the end, in the sense that he says, we need to consciously construct a body of we kind of need to consciously integrate the world because of the natural tension between civilizations. But anyway, I don't buy the idea that Russia, for cultural reasons, couldn't have become, in effect, part of the West. It's clear that Putin wanted to be part of the West.
Yeah, he talks about this phase in his political career as president when he was asking Western leaders, principally U.S. president, uh, what would happen if I tried to join NATO?
Yeah.
And he said that Bill Clinton said, well, that'd probably be a good idea. But then Bill Clinton went back, talked to his, intelligence people, and then came back for dinner that night with Putin and said,
I
actually,
said,
it's
just
it's
kidding.
it's not going to work. Um, so
Yeah. Well, I should watch. It sounds like, I mean, it would be interesting to know what audience he had in mind. It sounds like, well, who knows what was on his, I mean, so you did think, wow, this guy's kind of out of touch. I mean, it's not shocking to me that he's got this narrative rolling around in his head. He's under a
yeah,
lot of pressure. He fucked
yeah,
up. He did this invasion that turned out catastrophically, even though now the tide is turning again, and it may wind up looking like a big success for him. But still, he's been under a lot of pressure, and I don't doubt that he has come up with elaborate narratives, extended his previous narratives to make sense of all this. But it sounds like still a little weird that he would think it's a good idea to share all of this with his audience, depending
yes.
on what he thought his
Mm.
audience was. I don't know.
Definitely. I mean, first I'll just say, I mean, I don't think he's ever been less likable for me as he was in that first hour because he's just going on this harangue. It's not obviously relevant. It's kind of impressive that he knows all this. He has a deep historical knowledge of his country, definitely. Um, but if he's trying to appeal to Tucker Carlson's audience, he failed because Tucker was trying to get him to talk about NATO and even to talk about American domestic politics and how the US has screwed up its foreign policy and stuff. And Putin kind of demurred on that for the most part. Um, to his credit, kind of. I think maybe Tucker even wanted him to talk about Biden's mental state.
Mm,
That's kind of speculative on my part, but he kept on asking, why don't you just call the president and sort this out? And I kind of had the sense that he was hoping to get Putin to say something about Biden being
yeah.
like senile,
I
basically.
mean, Putin
Mm-hmm.
may have had in mind a Russian audience to a considerable extent. I assume they're going to
Mm-hmm.
see this. And, job one for him is staying in power.
Yeah.
But so,
Um,
yeah.
do you
Were you,
want to talk about other stuff that's not on the Earthling, or should we get right to the lead?
oh man, there's been so much stuff. I wrote stuff down. So I mean, there's the weird Biden thing. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, the Biden's very bad Thursday night. First of all, that the whatever that guy was, special prosecutor, special counsel, who had been appointed by the Biden administration, although he's a Republican, and had been appointed, I guess, as U.S. attorney by Trump. And of course, as probably everybody knows by now, although he said he wasn't going to, Biden didn't deserve to be indicted. He did deserve to have his electoral prospects ruined by this
Yeah.
guy. And the headline didn't begin to capture. I mean, it seemed to me the most damning things was the specific things of Biden's that he quoted.
Mm-hmm.
And look, I mean, as a number of people have noted out, like, this is not fair play. The deal with prosecutors is supposed to be, if you decide not to indict, you don't spend your time smearing the person,
Right.
and I would say further, if you are going to quote these seemingly very damning things, like Biden saying 2013, was I vice president then? I mean, that's right in the middle of the 8 years when he was vice president, right?
I thought he said it about 2009
He
too. He
said
said,
both.
was I still vice president in 2009? Yeah.
Was I still? Now that could be him getting yet and still kind of mixed up, which, by the way, I think are the same word in Spanish. And of course, he also called Sisi the president of Mexico.
But that one I could see why he did that, because he's thinking,
He's
the southern border of
southern border.
Gaza.
That's right.
Yeah. So he mixed
And
it up.
I mean, still, it's kind of a bad time to do it when you come out to a press conference to show
Hmm.
everybody you got your shit together. I mean, the other, yeah, well, whatever. Very bad. I mean, I don't know what to say about it, except there was again a lot of talk that I was trying to encourage on Twitter last night about, is it too late to find a replacement for this guy?
Hmm.
It's such a statement about how elites have totally lost control of major institutions, including the two parties. I
Hmm.
mean, the smoke filled room is so dead. But that said, I'm not convinced that Barack Obama could not have engineered, and maybe that he could not still engineer some magical thing. I mean, I
I
think
mean,
he could.
he's kind of a one man smoke filled room. Arguably, he engineered the Biden presidency because during the primary,
I think he did.
with against Bernie, he kind of stepped in and got people to endorse Biden. I don't remember the details now, but I think he's the guy that could do it, especially because Joe Biden is popular. I mean, was popular in part because he's Barack Obama's friend. Like, that's how they presented him. Uh, but I think it's too late at this point.
Well, what's not too late is to convince Biden uh, to step down. I mean, it may be, but that's the thing that, I mean, what apparently is too late is to have some new candidate arise and beat Biden just because the filing deadline for so many primaries has passed. But I think there was a time when Obama could have engineered that, and I think it may still not be too late if he really wanted to make a go of it. And first start off by talking to a lot of other Democratic elites and getting them on board.
But there's two awkward parts to this, which is the first one is it's awkward if he doesn't run for reelection. The second part is it's awkward if he doesn't kind of anoint Kamala Harris.
Well, that's the second hurdle.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I'll say for this press conference, which did have two bad moments, one of which you mentioned with Sisi calling him the president of Mexico when he's the president of Egypt. Um, and then the other one was when he was talking about his son who died because the special counsel apparently in his report, which I guess we should say, the report found that the DOJ is not going to bring charges against Biden for mishandling classified information, even though he seems to have willfully retained or something like that classified information and shared it with a ghostwriter. Um, but so it seems like it should be a good thing, but the bad thing is the guy said it's because Biden's attorneys will present him as an elderly man with a memory problem, and it would
Right.
be hard to convict him. Basically, he's like not competent to stand trial, and he's president, basically. But I'll say the press conference, I didn't think he was that bad. I
I
mean,
didn't see I didn't see that. I was, starting to work on the newsletter.
yeah,
And so I haven't seen, I mean, I glanced at Twitter and somebody said, wow, he's really on tonight. Whatever drugs they're giving him, I want some. But
that's exactly what I said. Yeah,
but and he would have been fine because he walked away from the microphone.
yeah.
And he hadn't yet called Sisi the president of Mexico.
But he had done one thing, which the special counsel mentioned that Biden forgot when his son Bo died, or something
Yeah.
like that. And then when he was talking about it, he starts to get emotional, and he talks about how he wears this rosary every day. How could I forget when my son died? I wear this rosary, which comes from, and he forgot like the church or the saint that was related to the rosary. Like, he clearly forgot,
Yeah.
and then he moved on.
That kind of stuff. I don't think it's that weird that he can't remember the year his son died. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
good at those kinds of dates. It's like, whereas the vice presidency, it's like you are conversant in American history, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bush was president until 2000, early 2009. Trump was elected in 2016. To me, that's weirder. Like, I have good friends who've died. I don't remember the year. And I, I don't know. Like,
That's
I'll always
true.
remember the
Mm.
day my dog died this summer, the date, but I don't know, the year may pass from my mind. Anyway,
That's totally true. I have the same experience. Yeah. Um, but yeah, some people were making the point that Putin looks a lot more lucid and cogent and intelligent relative to Biden because he can talk for an hour about Russia's deep history, and then it goes to Biden and he's not looking so good.
yeah, what is Putin like, early 70s or something?
He's got to be. I don't think he was that young when he got into politics, and he's been president for like ever. Let's see how old he is.
Um,
71.
yeah, that's nothing. I mean, between 71, I mean, really, between
Hmm.
71 and 81,
Yeah.
like falling off a cliff. I mean, different people differ, but 10 years is a lot at that stage in life. But I mean, I just went through 10 years. It was a lot. And I'm not even 71 yet. It was a
Hmm.
lot,
Yeah.
Andrew. Enjoy life while you can, because this was a lot.
Yeah, and Trump, he's also having his sort of memory issues, but they're not nearly as bad as Biden, which helps him.
Um, yeah, well, somebody surfaced this video of Trump a few months ago calling Orban the president of Turkey. Sounds kind of
Hmm.
like Erdogan. Sounds kind of like Erdogan.
Oh yeah, I hadn't even made that connection. That's the mix up.
Yeah,
Hmm.
but that's no excuse.
The other
So
big thing that happened that everyone's talking about is the Supreme Court seems like they're going to overturn the Colorado's Supreme Court's decision to kick Trump off the ballot.
that's not a shocker, it seems to. I mean, I think that was kind of expected.
One thing
I
that
mean,
wasn't expected is it seems like even the liberal justices are highly skeptical of Trump's challenger lawyer, like the
mm,
person against Trump. Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't have been death for Trump if the Supreme Court had just let Colorado, because there's only a couple states doing this right, and Trump could survive losing both, I think.
Yeah, I guess
But
Colorado's solidly a blue state. And I think the other one is Maine or is it Massachusetts? I'm having a
I'm not
M
sure.
related memory moment.
I was half thinking it was Michigan, but maybe I'm wrong. It was an M. We agree it was an M state. Um, so yeah, so maybe we should talk a little about the newsletter
Yes.
so I can go back to finishing the so the lead item is about this new evidence on lab leak. It surfaced actually, a couple weeks ago. Um, and I was going to write about it last week. And the upshot is, it adds some weight to the argument that this was a genetically engineered organism that escaped the lab. And it adds weight to the specific scenario that what happened was there was this joint US China project, the EcoHealth Alliance, a US NGO, was going to collaborate with various institutions, including the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And they sought funding. It was denied by DARPA, the Pentagon funding research funding agency. And if you ask, like, why DARPA, I think, of course, people get money anywhere they can. The rationale would have been probably that this could help us defend against a bioengineered weapon or something. But in any event, DARPA turns it down, and there was already non-trivial evidence that circumstantial, um, that maybe even after this was turned down, the research that was going to take place at Wuhan under this grant, under this project, took place. And there's a couple ways that could happen. Sometimes scientists apparently, as they're applying for funding, they go ahead and proceed with the research. Apparently, that's pretty common. So
Hmm.
it's actually possible if this happened that some of the Americans knew about it. I mean, the guy actually runs EcoHealth, although it's an American NGO, is himself a Brit, I think. But so it's possible that they knew about it. Or it's possible that Wuhan just thought, yeah, great idea. You can't get the money, but we can still get money and we can
Mhm.
do it. Um, the evidence was, not nothing to begin with. The fur and cleavage site. I mean, remember, when early on, long before anybody knew about this grant proposal, David Baltimore, Nobel laureate, molecular biologist, looked at this fur and cleavage site, which is on the COVID virus, it's part of the DNA, and said, that's a smoking gun. And then he kind of under pressure walked that back and said, okay, not a smoking gun, but looks more like something a human would add
Mhm.
and then something naturally occurring. And he's like this very eminent guy. And that was before they uncovered the grant proposal that said, we'll put a fur and cleavage site in a bat coronavirus, and part of the research will be done at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So obviously, that's not nothing right there. And then
Yeah.
the latest round of evidence. Now, this is like more than a year ago that surfaced. And the latest round of evidence is I don't I'm not technically sophisticated enough to tell you how much weight it adds to the argument, but apparently, I mean, what it was documents. Not we already had the grant proposal. This is documents reflecting the preparation of the proposal, communications among the people preparing the proposal, and basically it just adds some technical details that also correspond to the actual structure of the COVID virus. Okay, so however striking you think the resemblance between what they envisioned and what we wound up with, apparently that's more striking. But the main point of the piece is, you know, again, this latest thing, like the first round, is pretty much ignored by mainstream media, New York Times, and
Mhm.
so on. And I say that's a shame because that means that the conversation about it kind of stays in, uh, to some extent, in the kind of Trumpist circles where the reaction to this is very Chinaphobic and is more reason for a Cold War and disengagement when I'm saying the moral of the story is basically the opposite. I mean,
Mhm.
that, whether or not this happened, it could have happened. And that should tell us that we need to get serious about the international regulation of biotech.
Mhm. Yeah,
Um,
and to your point about Trumpy media and media figures being more interested in this, so the journalist behind the story that's divulging this information that you were just talking about, this latest bit of evidence, she's not Trumpy,
no,
but even she, like on
Emily
Twitter,
Kopp,
she seems one of the reasons I thought the story was interesting is because she seems very legit, like she knows what she's talking about. I
yeah.
don't really understand all this stuff, but I would encourage people to go watch interviews with her because she explains this stuff pretty well. But yeah, she's like retweeting people like Rand Paul and stuff. I don't dislike Rand Paul, but like those are the people who are talking about this, at least in the political establishment. And I kind of wanted to ask, so it seems like maybe one reason mainstream media isn't covering this now is because it's kind of embarrassing because they were dismissing these, these concerns back when COVID, like the pandemic first hit. But why were they so dismissive of the lab leak possibility in the first place? I never really understood that. I mean, there's a Wuhan Institute of Virology. Like the fact that that exists was the first
Well,
sign.
I think you mean why was mainstream media dismissive?
Yeah, and just kind of liberals in general.
Yeah. I think it's because it started out as a Trump theory. I mean, that's what I'm saying in the piece. It's a case where American political polarization kind of impedes good governance. I mean, it isn't just that it was Trumpists saying it. It's
Mm-hmm.
that they some of them were kind of had the way they were saying it had really kind of nationalist, even racist vibes.
Mm-hmm.
And at first it did seem crazy. Some of them were, some of it is crazy. Some of them were suggesting that it was an intentionally engineered and released bioweapon.
Right.
That's crazy. You
Like
don't
that.
release a bioweapon on your own population.
That's the like North Korean lady who is like big in conservative media. I think that's her point.
I think Peter Navarro said
Hmm.
something to, or said, we don't yet know whether it was an intentionally or
Yeah,
something. I
I
mean,
saw that.
some actual Trump officials.
I mean, I
So
never understood why it was racist. I mean, it seems like the counter explanation is like China has really lax food and health and safety standards like at their wet markets. Like that's the counter explanation. It seems like the Wuhan like a lab leak wasn't I never really understood why it was racist, you know. Except for all the extra crazy stuff that you just mentioned. But it kind of begs the question, like, why was Trump the first one to identify this? Is it just like a broken clock is right twice a day? Like at the time, there wasn't any reason to think this, but he kind of pounced on it. And then by the time the evidence started to come out, people were already against this theory.
um I mean, there was a big I mean, Steve Bannon was one of the first to publicize it.
Yeah.
And he was using it as part of his campaign to demonize China. That
Hmm.
was pretty early on. And so like they didn't have to use their imaginations much. The And then there was separately within the US biomedical establishment, there was a lot of pushback against it. I mean, partly we now think perhaps because some of the people were actually implicated in what actually happened.
Hmm.
Also, I mean, the American, they like a lot of scientists like international cooperation, and God bless them. And science has been a force, I think, for international kind of harmony and cross border collaboration, and you know, and I mean, it's the whole China phobic vibe. It winds up being in practice kind of racist, uh, whatever the explicit rationale, because you get to a point where every Chinese researcher at an American university is suddenly suspect, and whether or not you want to say it's technically racism, it's
Hmm.
I mean, it's a little like uh, if American Jews feel threatened, saying, "Don't worry, it's not actually anti-Semitism; it's anti-Zionism." It's like doesn't matter to them
Mm.
if they're being attacked. It's kind of you're kind of splitting hairs here.
Hmm.
Um, but so
Well, I do like this. I mean, I haven't read the lead item yet, but I do like this point that, a lot of people when they're thinking about this and they think it was a lab leak, people on the right, I mean, they're kind of thinking like we need to be madder at China. Like once people learn that China's responsible for
right,
this, that they screwed up the global economy
right.
for 3 years, there's going to be hell to pay. But I like your point that the actual lesson to draw from this is we need more international cooperation because there's an
Hmm.
international dimension to this. There's a race to the bottom element that we were talking about before, when we weren't taping. And the only way to address that is global governance stuff. So
Yeah. So so we have how long we've been talking? I guess is it time for a public service announcement? It's actually not a public service announcement. It's a self-service announcement.
yeah, I think it's been about 30 minutes, and yeah, we still need to talk, about a bunch of other items, but I think this is where the paywall comes in.
But first, we encourage so yeah, the rest in a couple of minutes we'll move to the part of this that's available only to paid subscribers of the Nonzero Newsletter, which we encourage everyone to become. And also, I mean, as long as we're begging for support, you know, rate and review. Like I almost never say this stuff that every podcaster is smart enough to say, it actually
Mm.
does help to rate us, review us. The competition is fierce. It's ferocious. All these podcasts have like big major platforms, and we're just us, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and subscribe on YouTube. Like on YouTube. Like the
Like on
videos.
YouTube,
Mm-hmm.
smash. Don't just hit the like button. Don't just click it. Smash it. And what else? I mean, the great thing, it's funny, like with these NPR pledge drives and everything, the way they say, all we're asking is like the price of a cup of coffee once a month. Like I went in a Starbucks the other day. It actually is the price of a cup of coffee. I thought they were exaggerating, but
Yeah.
no, coffee is coffee's, you can't get do you realize you can't get a coffee for 10 cents anymore, Andrew?
No, yeah, it's true. What'd you get? You just got a Pike Place? Tall brewed
I
coffee?
did get a Pike. That's my standard.
How much is it these days?
Well, a grande, I don't remember exactly, but it wasn't far from uh from
The
six
$6 a month
dollars a month,
subscription.
and even closer to $60 a year, which is the
Mm.
you know. So yeah. Anyway, if you do that, then you can get this special podcast feed that has the overtime segments of all the podcasts just automatically. And of course, you can fast forward through this part, the commercials.
And you can also listen to what's behind the paywall today, which we're
Yeah.
going to talk about the Middle East, blowback from the Qasem Soleimani assassination, troops in Syria and Iraq being attacked, AI updates, AIs nuking other AIs in war games,
Yeah.
and this new it's a foreign affairs article by a Haaretz editor-in-chief in which
Yeah, a
he's
lot of Middle East
Mm.
stuff on the other side of the paywall, and some AI stuff. My new obsession.
okay, so maybe
No JFK stuff this week, unless Andrew, you want to go
yeah.
there.
Yeah, don't speak
As
too
you
soon.
know, I mean, the kind of glasses you're wearing, those are very JFK-esque. Those are like everyone in
Ray-Bans.
these, like if you go peruse like videos of witnesses,
Mhm.
are those Ray-Bans?
Yeah.
Retro Ray-Bans. Anyway, everybody's wearing those glasses. All the people who say grassy knoll in black and white from the 1960s are wearing those glasses.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm
Oh,
happy with them. I had a more hipster style that was too thin and they were very fragile. Actually, playing soccer with some of the kids at the high school I used to teach at, some of the middle schoolers joined us, and I totally just ran over one of them. I did like this move and I turned around. I didn't realize he was there and I smashed into him and my glasses fell off and broke. And he fell down hard, but he was okay. It was fine. So
But
I
the
had to get
glasses are a
these.
real tragedy. Too bad about the kid too.
So yeah, maybe we should say goodbye to the free subscribers and
Yeah,
the
we thank
public.
you. We love you. Why don't you go spend the rest of the day smashing the like button? And now we head into overtime.
This was a free preview of Earthling Unplugged. To unlock the rest of this conversation and other exclusive audio content, become an NCN member at nonzero.substack.com.